Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Solari Report. We have a special treat today. You all know how much I appreciate how much good information can be gleaned from movies. Hollywood tells us all. And today we have a real, a person who's really extremely knowledgeable about that topic, Jay Dyer, who is the proprietor and founder of Jay's Analysis. Wonderful website I recommend to you on the internet. Jay's going to tell us about it more as we talk. I first met Jay when he made a presentation at the Secret Space Program Conference last year in Bastrop, Texas, and he wove a fabulous presentation on how different symbolism, different parts of different movies explained what was going on in this world. And I said, now, there's a guy who's mastered the movies and the symbolism of what they can teach us. So I immediately asked him, Jay, would you come do the Solari Report? And he's got a wonderful show, and I've been on his show. So now he's joining me on my show. So, Jay, welcome to the Solari Report.
Well, thank you, Ms. Fitz. It's a pleasure to be here. We had a lot of fun in Texas. I learned a lot from you and the other speakers. And I think we had a good interview a few months ago on my show, and so it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so the other thing I have to say is you had the good sense to get out of LA and move to Tennessee.
Well, that's funny. I've never lived in LA. I lived in San Diego for about 6 years.
Oh, okay. Well, when you live in Tennessee, you think of LA and San Diego as basically one metropolis.
Well, that's true. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I was going to say we can say that I lived in LA and that I was really hip and famous and popular, and that I needed to get away from it all and come to Tennessee.
Okay, well, let's just dive in. What we're focused on today is what the movies teach us about mind control, and I off and on at the Solari Report I get questions about what is mind control, how does it work, and partly because I feel it's so important. If you're going to understand how geopolitics or the economy work, you need to understand mind control as a technique.
Right.
Whether it's, mind control of the general population, sort of big mind control, or little of individuals. And it really is all in the movie. So I appreciate your joining me to talk about it. So why don't we just start off with, because mind control is a big topic. So what do we mean by mind control?
Well, as you said, it could apply to many things, but specifically we know that there are programs that have been developed by entities such as the Tavistock Institute out of England, as well as the programs by the CIA, oftentimes referred to under the moniker of MK Ultra, but this was actually dozens of sub-projects that spanned a few decades, beginning in the 40s, with the military experimenting with truth drugs and, what drugs could be used to extract information out of captured, POWs, or to create, as you said, some sort of agent or assassin. What types of techniques might be used to basically program. And so the doctors involved in this were pretty infamous, I guess we could say now, characters like Jose Delgado or Dr. Cameron. And you can actually find their books. They've written books that discuss these subjects openly, Dr. Jolly and West. And what their books talk about is different techniques and patterns and successes that they had in getting human beings to do what they want.
Right.
So from these projects, what sprung from this was MK Ultra was ultimately investigated by the Senate, and it was eventually shut down, supposedly in the 70s, and this led to it basically being renamed MK Search and was moved to Fort Detrick, so it was put under the umbrella of biological warfare, which kind of makes sense because it uses chemical agents, of course, at least in these early on programs, where they were discovering the possibilities of what could be done with LSD. And so I don't know how familiar your audience might be with Tim Leary, but Timothy Leary was part of this overarching project. He was working with a lot of these doctors and psychiatrists. And that's what's funny is that most people think of this kind of thing being maybe a military project, and that might have been what it was at its inception. But over time, it really fell into the hands of the doctors and psychiatric institutions and the university system, which is where a lot of this research was done, such as Mount Royal in Canada, where Dr. Ewan Cameron was, where he was experimenting with electroshock as well as LSD, or Stanford Research Institute, where they were experimenting with all kinds of things, including what you might have seen in the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats. Now, I know that's not a top movie that's on our list of topics today, but that is a film that's dealing with something tangentially related to the topic of mind control and MKUltra. So that's the establishment's origin of this stuff. And then what we have in film is kind of a lot of references, hints, and then explicit storylines that deal with this, going all the way back to John Frankenheimer's film, The Manchurian Candidate, a film that we're going to talk about, something like Gaslight. So, there's just countless, I've collected together a list of probably about 40, somewhere between upper 30 and 40. Yeah, that explicitly deal with this theme, and it's really popular now, in the kind of big blockbusters that come out, like these Marvel Avengers type movies. They're always using this theme of mind control and programming and so forth. But to conclude my response to your question, I would say that in the broad sense, really what mind control is advertising and mass marketing and Hollywood pop culture. So it can simultaneously reveal things as it's also using those techniques. And I'm not saying by that all advertising marketing is evil or bad. I'm just saying that it's the same principles and techniques are going to be used for good or for evil by persons who might be schooled in these techniques. And so, for example, the early days of the CIA, a lot of the people who went from the OSS or the CIA, or who went to it, they came from the world of advertising.
Right.
So anyway, that's my rough response there.
One of the things I wanted to mention before, we're not going to discuss it today, is that one of my favorite books on mind control is written by the author of the best-selling book Encyclopedia of Country Living, Carla Emery. And believe it or not, she wrote a book called Secret Don't Tell that takes the history of mind control back into the medieval ages. And it's really the history of criminal hypnosis and, creating mind control agents. And then there are other people who take it back to the Crusades, coming back into Europe from the Middle East, where they ran into the assassins, the original assassins, and the use of mind control to create the perfect assassin. But so there's a long history here, but there's no doubt that the last, since World War II, we've seen an explosion of investment in mind control. And as that investment has, increased, we see Hollywood telling us more and more. So we're I would say historically we're in a very intense mind-controlled period. Yes. That's what it looks like to me. Okay, so you chose, or we both chose, I chose some, but you chose some very unusual movies. And we have 12 movies to run through, and after I went through them again yesterday in detail, and I realized, boy, they really do show a lot of the different techniques. So we've chosen 12, and I'm going to ask you to just walk us through them, and you pick the order. And it's pretty juicy, so let's dive in.
All right. Well, I didn't really put much thought into the order of these films, so don't worry. This isn't a film sequence that's going to put you into any kind of mind control trance. So I just kind of randomly listed them. So the first one that I thought stood out because I'm presently writing my book, and I just finished the chapter on this film. It's Stanley Kubrick's 1980 film, The Shining. This is, generally listed as one of the top horror films of all time.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting about this is it's adapted from the Stephen King story and changed a bit by Kubrick. And what we see here is the story of Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, a guy who wants to be great. He wants to be amongst the upper crust, the elite, and he thinks that his family is something that is a hindrance to this. And so he, consistently through the film will make these derogatory statements about how his family's keeping him back, and he wants to be amongst this upper crust who are the jet set and the elite that once inhabited this Overlook Hotel, which was a location where they would have dalliances and orgies and parties. So it's no longer a location for that kind of activity by the time of the story in the film, but Jack starts to experience spectral phenomena and what I argue is a kind of gradual demonic possession. And so these spirits are whispering to him, what he needs to do. And we also tragically learn that he has abused his son, Danny. And Danny has actually developed the phenomenon which, usually happens in the cases of traumatic mind control that relates in severe trauma, a split in his personality. And so Danny has an alternate person who kind of protects him named Tony. And whenever Tony comes to the surface, he speaks in a different voice. But there's also a kind of spiritual element here. So a lot of times when you're watching this film, you're thinking right away that, well, Tony may be a demon or something. But in actual fact, it's Tony who kind of helps Danny throughout the film to cope with the trauma of his father. And we also learn that Jack isn't just abusing him; he also seems to have sexual deviancy and have possibly sexually abused Danny as well. And so we see this maze that is, I think, a representation of the world that Danny and his wife Wendy, or his mom Wendy, are lost in. They're lost in the sick maze of Jack, right? And I'm sure everybody remembers that famous scene at the end, where he's chasing Danny through the maze. But the point being is that you consistently see mirror imagery, you consistently see things written in reverse, red rum, right? And these are all phenomena that we can find associated with things that relate to mind control. So I picked this one as one of the top ones just because it includes trauma, abuse, pedophilia, I think, which is hinted at, as well as the spiritual element that Jack thinks that he's going to enter into greatness and dance amongst the elite if he's willing to commit blood sacrifice by killing his family.
This is something Kubrick looks at in more than a couple films.
Right.
But Franklin Sanders has an expression he'll say about somebody who hungers to work their way up the social prestige ladder. They pine for the treats of the tapeworm. The tapeworm being the hierarchy and the, Mr. Global System. And The Shining is good. It shows how somebody sells out that which is real for something that is unreal.
Yeah, and I got a chance to work on my Jack Nicholson impersonation while
Oh, perfect.
So, do you want to hear a little?
Oh, yeah. So you're going to do a scene from The Shining?
Well, there's just this one phrase that always sticks in my head when he's being interviewed. He says, well, my wife Wendy's a confirmed horror film fanatic. I'm sure she's going to love it.
Nicholson is so unbelievable. Kubrick. Boy, Kubrick, I'm a great fan of Kubrick, but his last one, Eyes Wide Shut, he died, I think, right after he finished editing it. I forget which, but you almost
Right, that's
feel
the
like
story,
he
yeah.
went too far in that one. Okay, so what's your next one?
Well, let's see. We've got next on the list is AI. And AI was interesting because Kubrick was involved in this film. This is actually a script that he was going to turn into a movie. Never came about, so Spielberg picked up the torch on this one and also altered the ending of Kubrick's version. So what we have here is a representation both of artificial intelligence and the possibilities as to where that might lead in the future, including the idea of childless families adopting or buying, I guess, a kind of Pinocchio boy, right, to be their substitute son. And there's a lot of references to mythology and to fairy tales, Pinocchio, Cinderella, and so forth. And so we have that David is the AI here, and what Spielberg wants us to do is to feel sorry for the AI, basically. It's you'll notice this trend in a lot of films that deal with artificial intelligence is that we need to begin to consider the possibility that in the future they will have rights. And so I've dealt with this in a lot of articles at my site, and I think that this is a preparation and basically what I call predictive programming. This is prepping us for the acceptance of artificial intelligence in every aspect of our life. And so we'll get to more of that, I'm sure, later. But what I called it was a transhumanist fairy tale,
Right.
because it's all about David essentially becoming alive, becoming real. And what's curious is that through all the biblical imagery that's kind of used and twisted, there's a lot of Cain and Abel type symbolism that's used with his human so-called brother who's crippled. And we find that David is better at everything that his brother can do. His brother is also kind of a butthead. He's a really annoying guy. You can't stand the guy. But you really, really like David, and I think this is all on purpose. And so there's a really weird scene where Monica is going to activate David's emotional side. That's his mother, of course. And what she does is that she recites these trigger words that activate him. And I always found that curious because I think in a lot of these films what you're going to see is that they have not just a deeper mythological significance or symbolic significance, but they also kind of refer to how things operate with people who are under mind control.
Right.
And there are trigger words and so forth. And so David kind of represents a child, dealing with this kind of abuse and mind control, just like Danny in The Shining. So even though this is an AI character, right, I think there's also a deeper reference to the possibilities of what goes on in mind control. And so the film tries to excite our emotions to feel sorry for David, and Spielberg pictures the AI like Jews being taken to Nazi concentration camps.
Right.
That's explicit, whether they're being taken off, and there's references to the Holocaust that the robots make. And so there's also hints at Dante's Inferno. They go to the flesh fair where the robots are being ripped apart in a kind of Christ-like scene where they're strapped with arms spread in a kind of cruciform pose. And really, I think that the message is that, like 2001, it's really going to be AI that's going to take us into the future, or humans are going to die and the AI will live on. That seems to be the message of AI, because the end of the film, of course, the robots have advanced and appear to look kind of like aliens, but they're actually just advanced AI, and they don't remember or know about their creators, so they're kind of doing some excavation and archaeology trying to figure out about their human creators, and they find David, and so David basically achieves eternal life or immortality as a kind of new Adam. Right? He's a new kind of Christ figure.
Right. It's amazing how many of these movies explore the engineering both of humans or robots who take on human characteristics with AI. It comes
Absolutely.
up again and again. Yeah.
And I do see that as a kind of preparatory programming.
Well, someone from Tennessee sent me for Christmas. They sent me a box of chocolate pecans, and then a video on transhumanism. And I wrote him a note back, and I said, "Thanks for making me fat and depressed at Christmas." It's one of the most depressing documentaries I ever watched. Okay, on to the next.
Let's see. So I listed next Blade Runner, and Blade Runner is, of course, the Philip K. Dick story. Do androids dream of an electronic sheep? I think. I'm trying to think off the top of my head here. Anyway, but so Blade Runner deals with a lot of the same topics that we've seen so far, and this was made, put into film format in 1978. No, I'm sorry, 83 by Ridley Scott. 82 by Ridley Scott.
Yeah.
And we see the 2020 landscape of Los Angeles, which is interesting because it's a huge hellhole, and it's a sort of corporately controlled, multicultural cesspit, ruled over by this giant uncapped pyramid, where the corporate elite sort of sit above everyone. And the way that this corporation has risen to power is that they have created synthetic humans, and not just synthetic humans. They actually have a whole industry where they've gotten so good with their mimesis, or creating copies or mimics, that you can't tell one apart from another. A real human, from what they call a replicant, right? An AI. And so the only way to do this is to read the very small, microscopic serial numbers that are listed on replicants. And so Harrison Ford, of course, plays the character Deckard, who's a cop who's very good at hunting down replicants. And we discover that Rutger Hauer's character, named Roy Batty, is this replicant who's kind of gone rogue. And they're wanting to break free from their termination programming, right? So they have a programming that they're very good at being assassins, they're very good at killing, but they have a kind of expiration date. And so Roy Batty decides he wants to be free from this and continue living, so to speak. So him and his cadre, we learn that they're on a killing spree, and Roy Batty wants to get back to his creator and find out how to end this termination programming. Now, this is curious because this sounds a lot like the kind of stories that we hear and read about with programmed assassins. They have sometimes this suicide programming where they are, to some degree, told, or it's instilled within them, that if something happens, if they're caught, whatever, to go ahead and kill themselves. And we do read about that kind of thing in, projects such as Bluebird, Artichoke, and Kilter, and so forth. At least it's at least hinted at there, especially with the kind of work that Ewan Cameron was doing. And so we also have that AI theme. So isn't it curious that what we continue to see is mind control and the AI theme being paired together, all the way back into the 70s and 80s. And so, there's a lot that you could say about Blade Runner just because it's so filled with, nanotech comes up in Blade Runner. This is back in, how in the world did Phil K. Dick and, I guess Ridley Scott, they must have had some inside knowledge, they were talking about nanotech back then. So
well, I'm trying to remember, is Rick the cop who goes after the replicants, is it finally come out in the end that he is a replicant?
Yes, that is the big reveal, is that Deckard...
Right, so he's mind-controlled into thinking he's a human.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and the way he discovers this, of course, is that he has the same dream sequences that the replicants have. And so what that eventually tells him is that, that even his dreams that he thinks are his are actually programmed. And we see that a lot of the replicants have been given false memories. They've been implanted with memories from another source, that being their creators, which makes them think that they're real. They have memories of their childhood and growing up on by the beach and playing on riding a bike and so forth. And it's interesting too. I mentioned in my piece DARPA, and DARPA has the ability to, at least so they claim, to implant false memories. There have been mainstream even articles that DARPA talks about this. So again, when we see AI and we see mind control paired up once again.
Well, it's interesting. The two techniques that you see in this whole series of movies is one, implanting false memories, and then also wiping memories. So in some cases you're trying to wipe people's real memories. In other cases you're trying to implant false memories. And it's almost, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I was interested in how many movies you chose that used artificial intelligence, but you're watching, it's almost like you're watching a huge prototype through the centuries of asking, can I turn a human being into a machine, and can I turn a machine into a human being? Right.
That is the key. You nailed it right there.
Right. And, it's funny, we're not going to talk about Bill Gibson and any of his, Neuromancer or any of his work, but, can I send the human consciousness in to travel around in the machine? And there's one you chose where, in fact, that comes up. But, that ultimately, all the techniques that they use to try and turn a human being into machine, as you said, you're watching them use those techniques to manipulate the robots. Yeah. Okay, so that was Blade, and it's funny, Blade Runner is Ridley Scott, and Ridley Scott and Tony Scott are two of my favorite directors of all time. Tony did Enemy of the State, which is one of my favorites, and finally, one day, a friend of mine called me and said, I just had lunch with Tony Scott, and he said to say thank you for promoting Enemy of the State as much as you do.
Well, that's really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool, because they're just amazing. They're amazing.
I like Tony Scott's films too.
Yeah. Okay, so what's next?
Let's see. We have Bourne Trilogy listed next. I've read some Robert Ludlum, but it's been a long time, and I did go back and watch some of these, but I didn't get to the entire Bourne Trilogy. But I remember it pretty good, and it's pretty on the surface as to what's going on here. We learn that Jason Bourne, played by Matt Damon, is of course a programmed assassin, and so he's had these instances of kind of blacking out, dissociating that we've seen early on in the films. I think in part one, and he doesn't know, he's floating around the Mediterranean Sea. He doesn't know he got shot, why is he there, and he has amnesia, like he doesn't remember, who he is and what's going on, and so he discovers, of course, that he's quite proficient at killing people. So to make a long story short, he's involved in these different operations, Operation Treadstone and so forth. And throughout the trilogy, what we learn is that he was, in fact, put into the MK Ultra program, and he was a programmed assassin. And this, of course, led to him kind of having a break eventually, and he went nuts, so to speak, but he went nuts fighting the establishment who programmed him, right, who basically wronged him. So, there's a lot of Cold War type stuff that ties into that, which is always in Robert Ludlum stories. But I think that, Ludlum is definitely basing what he must have had some inside, sources and knowledge of this stuff. I don't recall his background off the top of my head, but he probably has been military service or something. But yeah, so we have here one of the things that is not mentioned in the original trilogy that I thought was curious that came up in part 4, which I did write an analysis of, is the Bourne Legacy, which has Jeremy Renner taking kind of the place of the Matt Damon character, but a character named Aaron Cross. And there we have this pharmaceutical company that steps into the picture, and here we have this direct tie-in to how MK Ultra really came about with LSD. Right, and the pharmaceutical company has developed a nanotech pill that he has to take if he wants to live. So this ties into the Super Soldier program, and the Super Soldier program is a development out of MKUltra, the idea of biologically enhancing humans through whatever means, be it chemical, android, cyborg, so forth. All of these come out of MKUltra because of the fact that Jose Delgado and Dr. Ewan Cameron were involved in implanting electrodes into human brains and so forth, and firing different, switches and seeing what would happen.
Right.
And as I mentioned as well on different interviews, what's called the Schwitzgebel machine, and this was the prison tracking device that was developed in the 1970s to monitor a person's heart rate and send it back, and their location, send it back to the guard tower, so that you didn't have to constantly, stare at the prisoners all day. You could just kind of let them wear this anklet. Now, doesn't that sound like the iWatch?
Right.
That's exactly what the iWatch does. It monitors your heart rate, your location, and pretty much everything about you.
Right.
Anyway, that's a different topic. But what we see is that with Bourne Legacy in particular is that big pharma and transhumanism, i.e. super soldiers, biological enhancement, genetic modification, are all related to MKUltra.
So this is out of the blue, but one of my theories is ISIS are super soldiers.
Well, they're certainly aided by a superpower.
Well, but if you look at what pictures we have, not to say that they're reliable, but they tend to be taller. And, of course, they're covered, so you can't see what color their skin is. But I suspect, you've got a whole pile of super soldiers in there, plus mercenaries. Anyway, and that's why I think, not for today, but exploring what the movies tell us about super soldiers is always very interesting.
It is interesting.
Yeah. The Bourne Trilogy, of course, has gone on and on and on, but I think probably the greatest mind control thing about the Bourne Trilogy is they always leave you with the fantasy that somebody who knows the internal tricks of, how the intelligence agencies operate can live free and under the radar of the intelligence agencies. Good luck with that. Yeah. That's the ultimate mind control is to imply that the network is still loose enough that you can go under the radar. I didn't know if you know this, but they're coming out with a new one with Matt Damon back again. It's called Jason Bourne. It's coming out in July. Or that's scheduled for July this year, yeah. Okay, so what's next?
Well, I think next I chose Kingsman, and this was curious because it dealt with the British side of all this, and I did a lot of research in my graduate period on British intelligence, so I found this one to be really interesting in terms of what it revealed. It revealed quite a bit. It's set in the context of kind of a satirical, comic booky, jokey fashion. It nevertheless revealed quite a bit of truth, particularly with regard to depopulation and eugenics. And so that's something that we don't generally see in mind control films. It's usually focused on the story of somebody like Jason Bourne, but here we have an overarching, I call it almost the ultimate conspiracy film, because we see that this nefarious character played by Samuel L. Jackson is going to use electromagnetic technology through the cell phones, through a back door, to basically drive everybody crazy and create pandemonium and chaos. And then the elites will, of course, kind of secret themselves away to a breakaway civilization while everybody else goes to heck. And there you have it. And I think that's the real plan. I mean, we can find actual documents from people like Michael Aquino, where he talks about the use of PSYOPs, and he's, of course, the head of the Temple of Set, which is a satanic organization. And he's a colonel in the military, and he deals with PSYOPs, and he wrote a famous piece called From PSYOP to Mind War, The Psychology of Victory, and it discusses extensively the use of electromagnetic technology for mind control. Zbigniew Brzezinski, the famous long-time bureaucrat person who's been there forever, wrote in his book back in Between Two Ages, back in 1972 or 3, of that very thing of using electromagnetic wave technology to influence masses of people. So I thought that this was curious. It was all revealed in the Kingsman, this kind of jokey film.
Well, I think The Kingsman is a very important film. Now, I have to tell you, as a movie, I think it's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But in terms of outing the technology, to me, it's a must-watch. You have to, and I'm always telling people, please do not watch this with your children. This is so violent.
Yeah,
the violence is so completely over the top. There's one scene where the person who controls the technology is Richmond Valentine, played by Samuel Jackson. Does an absolutely fabulous acting job. But so Richmond gives away free SIM cards. He's fielded global satellites. Space is important, and he's got this machine where he can send out the tones through a SIM card. And to prototype it, just to run a test, he runs a test on a Southern Pentecostal church, 200, devout Christians giving praise in the middle of a Sunday service, and then they jump up and start killing each other. And 200 Christians, devout Christians, kill each other on a Sunday in church, as a result of only some of them having the Richmond Valentine SIM cards.
Exactly.
So complete and perfect mass mind control. You don't have to do anything. It's not expensive. It's highly economic, and you can get phenomenal results is the implication. Now, let me tell you an interesting statistic. I wrote a commentary 2 weeks ago called The Kingsmen Campaign. I called up sort of 20 of the people I most confer with, trust, whose advice I get, people like Joseph Farrell, many people and I said, okay, what percentage of the support for the leading candidates in the Republican and Democratic primaries comes from Richmond Valentine's machine? Okay, so let me ask you, what percentage of their support comes from mind control technology? Whether it's advertising, whether it's entrainment, subliminal programming, whether it's, Richmond Valentine. So how much of their current support comes from mind control?
I would say the vast amount, especially when we look at
all 20 people, the average was 75 to 80%.
Yeah.
They said the vast majority of the support for those two candidates is coming from mind control technology. Then I asked them the question, okay, how many people, what percentage understand that? And they said 1% or less.